Every day, Hezbollah tries to portray themselves as simply a political party being bullied by Israel as they tried to provide for the people of Lebanon. What they won't tell you is that their organization is rooted in the elimination of Israel. They have a rich history of terrorist attacks, and they fuel their enterprise through a vast criminal network that involves human trafficking and the narcotics trade. This is the darker side of Hezbollah that they don't want you to know about. As a quick background, Hezbollah, or the Party of God, is a Shia militant group and political organization based in Lebanon. It was founded in 1982 in response to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon with the backing of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. Hezbollah's primary goal was initially to resist Israeli occupation, but over time it's evolved into a pretty powerful political, military, and social organization with significant influence in Lebanon as well as across the broader Middle East. So let's bring it up to this current conflict. On October 8th, one day after Hamas conducted a massacre in southern Israel, Hezbollah joined the fight and began launching rockets, drones, and missiles into northern Israel. This led to a relatively light military response, all things considered, from Israel in the form of airstrikes against Hezbollah military locations, as nearly 100,000 Israelis were forced to evacuate their homes in the north. The tension on the northern border continued to escalate until September 2024, when Israel began to really take the gloves off and began their effort to end this issue with Hezbollah once and for all. Then, after a series of airstrikes and covert operations like the exploding pagers, Israel eliminated Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, as well as nearly all of his senior deputies. Nasrallah's successor was actually killed as well, like 2 days into his tenure. Honestly, it's been a lot of involuntary turnover in that organization as of late. Now, just a few weeks ago, it would have been worth running through an organization chart for Hezbollah to kind of call out some of their senior leaders, name the key figures, but not anymore. Just about everyone of any level of importance in that organization has been eliminated by Israel in the span of just a few weeks. And honestly, it's pretty unclear at this point who's in charge of anything inside of Hezbollah anymore. All right, so back to it. So at the start of October, Israeli ground forces began moving into southern Lebanon with what appears to be a goal of creating a buffer zone, likely along the lines dictated in UN Resolution 1701, which required Hezbollah to stay north of the Litani River. That fighting's ongoing right now, with multiple daily reports coming out from both sides describing that near continuous combat. Now, the recent focus on Hezbollah's fighting with Israel has, I think, left many people around the world to believe that this group is similar to Hamas, a small organization with limited reach and influence exclusively focused on their little patch of ground. But that's really missing the mark. Hezbollah is an organization fueled by hate, with much broader aspirations and a track record of conducting criminal and lethal activities all around the world. Today, we're going to get into a few of those, namely Hezbollah's desire to eliminate Israel, their involvement with cartels related to narcotics and human trafficking, some of which has the potential to affect the U.S. southern border, as well as Hezbollah's history of indiscriminate terrorist attacks. But first, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. 77% of people said they were planning to take action against this specific threat in the next 12 months. I have. What are you waiting for? And I regularly mention how, whether we like it or not, we're all targets in the information war, and this is a part of that. You, me, my family, yours, we're all targets of data brokers who purchase information like our home address, phone numbers, medical records, and more for any reason at all, which should be concerning. The companies selling our data don't even care what it's being used for or who's buying it. Security.org ran a study recently where they found that 88% of adults are concerned about who has access to their personal information online, but only 6% had taken steps to protect themselves. That's where tools like Delete Me come in, the sponsor of today's video. Delete Me is a subscription service that constantly scans the internet, and whenever they find your personal data available for sale, they have it removed. I use Delete Me, and in just August alone, they removed 20 listings across 20 different data brokers with 264 pieces of my personally identifiable information. So if you're in the 77% planning to get after this issue soon, why wait? Get started with Delete Me today. Check the link in the description and use code Preston for 20% off all consumer plans. Now, Hezbollah has a long history of making extreme statements about the destruction of Israel and the elimination of Jews, often rooted in its ideology of resistance against Zionism. Since its founding in 1982, Hezbollah has adopted a relatively hardline stance against Israel, advocating for the complete destruction of the Israeli state. Now, I want to stress that real quick. There's not some sort of two-state solution or coexistence idea with Hezbollah. To them, the only end state here worth working towards is wiping Israel and their population off the map. It's a little extreme. Now, we're going to get into some of these statements, but I should note that this didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, a major reason that Hezbollah attained any power at all in the first place was in response to the Israeli actions like military invasions and an occupation of portions of Lebanon. However, it seems like Hezbollah has taken that hatred of Israel that was part of their initial founding belief and really stretched it to encompass all that they are today. As Ahmed Fawad Al-Khatib put it recently, quote, "It's time to expose the fraud and disaster that is resistance, which has become a Trojan horse for domination, control, theft of resources, and external agendas that harm the people in the Middle East. Suicidal adventurism against a powerful adversary like Israel is impractical, unethical, destructive, harmful, and outright stupid. It's time for Hamas and Hezbollah fans in the Western world, especially those who promote the anti-colonial narratives, to realize the disaster that the resistance has inflicted upon the Palestinian and Lebanese people. Peace, coexistence, development, pragmatism, and common sense are courageous and necessary evolutions to save and improve lives. Islamic resistance movements are cowardly imbeciles who constantly lead to failure, defeats, losses, and setbacks. Hamas and Hezbollah are the enemies of the Palestinian and Lebanese people. They are worthy of contempt, condemnation, critique, and abandonment, not admiration or respect." Look, Ahmed is awesome. He's really brave in speaking out on a lot of these issues, and I'll link his account in the description below. He's absolutely worth the follow over on X. All right, so digging into some of these statements now. Hezbollah's 1985 manifesto explicitly called for the destruction of Israel and views Zionism as a foreign and illegitimate presence in the Middle East. In this document, Hezbollah outlined its resistance strategy and states its ultimate goal: the establishment of an Islamic state in Lebanon and the eradication of Israel. The group refers to Israel as a, quote, "cancerous entity that must be removed from the region." The manifesto goes on to state, quote, "Our struggle will end only when this entity is obliterated," adding that they reject any form of negotiations with Israel. And looking at a few statements from their leadership, namely the late Hassan Nasrallah, who in 2002 said, quote, "If they, the Jews, all gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide." Then in 2006, Nasrallah stated, quote, "Israel must be wiped out of existence." Nasrallah's narrative of resistance, repeatedly highlighted in speeches and media, portrays the destruction of Israel as a religious and moral imperative. In fact, Hezbollah's long-term vision is that Israel's destruction is inevitable, and it often couches its goals in terms of endurance and patience. I mean, Hezbollah leaders have said that while Israel may have temporary power now, its ultimate defeat is certain due to its inherent illegitimacy and the moral superiority of Hezbollah's cause, which is an important piece to keep in mind as we get into some of their ongoing activities. Now, as extreme as some of those views are, I don't think that this is really new to anybody who's even loosely following events in the region. So now let's turn to some more underreported items, like Hezbollah's sex trafficking, narcotics, and terrorism. Not too long ago, the first victim of Hezbollah's sex trafficking operation spoke out publicly. I have to think this young woman saw Hezbollah being weakened, their leaders being killed, and thought that maybe for the first time she could be safe in sharing these horrific details that were just documented in a video titled "The Sex Slave, Abducted and Assaulted by Hezbollah." As a little context, Hezbollah has been operating in Syria, supporting Bashar al-Assad's forces since 2011, a topic we'll get into more here shortly. But for now, it's just important to know that for 13 years now, Hezbollah has maintained a significant presence in Syria. According to that video, Alia, a 20-year-old woman from Raqqa, Syria, was worried after her husband didn't come home one night. She was told that maybe Hezbollah took him and forced him to fight. So she went to the one man who hung around her town that she had heard was a member of Hezbollah and asked him for help. The man took her to a farm and said that her husband was set to meet there in 10 minutes, but instead, this Hezbollah operative took her inside, raped and beat her, and forced her into 6 months of sex slavery along with other girls as young as 16. Eventually, Alia's brother learned of her whereabouts and was forced to pay Hezbollah $10,000 to purchase his sister back from them. Now, while this story is getting more attention today, it's far from the only case. In February 2019, Lebanese authorities uncovered a prostitution ring in the Hezbollah-controlled Bekaa Valley that included senior members of the militant organization. However, unable to arrest the men or really enforce Lebanese laws in Hezbollah territory, the men went free and likely continued their money-making operations in the sex trade. Of course, this should be a little surprising for an organization that considers itself pious and shrouded in religion, but it's not just sex trafficking. Hezbollah also deals in narcotics. One of its most notorious narcotics operations is based in South America, particularly the tri-border area, TBA, between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. This specific region is known for smuggling and criminal activities, and Hezbollah has used it recently as a key hub for its operations. Now, Hezbollah collaborates with drug cartels, especially in Latin America, to facilitate the flow of cocaine into Europe and the Middle East. In exchange for facilitating drug shipments and using this network to move money, Hezbollah receives large sums, which it then launders through various channels. This money is funneled back into its operations, including funding its military activities against Israel and other adversaries in the region. As a few examples here, in 2008, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, uncovered Hezbollah's ties to Latin American drug cartels, particularly through the Project Cassandra investigation, which revealed that Hezbollah was using the cocaine trade to help fund its global operations. In 2016, the DEA arrested several Hezbollah operatives involved in a massive drug smuggling money laundering ring across South America and Europe. Then in 2018, authorities in Colombia seized 2.4 tons of cocaine that they say was linked to Hezbollah, believed to be intended for the U.S. market. Now, Hezbollah's smuggling networks aren't just limited to drugs, but also include weapons, counterfeit goods, and other contraband. And it's this aspect that could be increasingly worrying to the United States, especially along our southern border. Now, I do want to be clear here that there is no evidence of Hezbollah planning direct attacks on the United States, but their relationships, ideology, and capabilities have to be considered as a viable threat. A major concern here is that Hezbollah is so well versed in smuggling and human trafficking that they could be relied upon to bring terrorist operatives into the United States through their connections with South America, namely some of the Mexican drug cartels. The reason to keep this top of mind is that the group's now former leader, Hassan Nasrallah, regularly threatened the United States and called for his supporters to take action against American interests. He's referred to the United States as a primary enemy, and Hezbollah has encouraged lone wolf-style attacks against U.S. citizens, especially in places with large Jewish communities. And of course, we can't discount that Hezbollah may have a more significant and robust presence in South America than their very close ally, Iran. I mean, we're hearing more and more now that Iran is hoping to conduct or facilitate an attack against the United States in response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani back in 2020. Knowing that, we have to take the Hezbollah presence in South America seriously, especially given the group's history of terrorist attacks. So today, Hezbollah is designated a terrorist organization by the United States, Israel, and the European Union, and roughly 30 other countries around the world. I think sometimes that term can be thrown around loosely, and we may take it to mean groups that the United States just doesn't like. In this case, however, it's directly tied to Hezbollah's history of terrorist attacks, which date back to the group's founding. Hezbollah's most infamous early attack was the bombing of the U.S. Embassy and U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon in 1983 that killed 241 U.S. servicemen and 58 French paratroopers. Hezbollah then went on to conduct a series of kidnappings of Western diplomats, journalists, and military personnel in Lebanon throughout the 1980s. These hostages were often held by the organization for years and used as bargaining chips to secure political and/or financial concessions. Then in 1985, Hezbollah operatives hijacked the Trans World Airlines flight en route from Athens to Rome. Passengers there were held hostage for 17 days, and a U.S. Navy diver was murdered by Hezbollah. In 1992, Hezbollah carried out a car bombing against the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, where they killed 29 civilians and wounded 242 more. Then 2 years later, it would get even worse. In 1994, Hezbollah was implicated in the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentine history when they detonated a suicide car bomb at a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires. The bombing killed 85 people and wounded more than 300, and was claimed by Ansar Allah, a Hezbollah-aligned group. In fact, the Argentine government accused the Iranian government of directing this bombing and Hezbollah of carrying it out. This attack, along with the earlier 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, demonstrated Hezbollah's reach in South America. Then in 2012, a Hezbollah operative carried out a suicide bombing on a bus in Bulgaria that was transporting 42 Israelis, most of whom were children. The blast killed the driver and 5 passengers while wounding 32 others. That's a lot. I mean, take your pick, but pretty awful attacks spanning across decades. Now, I do want to come back to Hezbollah's actions in Syria. This is something that really turned some of the Middle East against the organization. I mean, while Hezbollah's stated purpose for sending fighters to Syria was to assist Syrian President Assad in combating groups like Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, many of their actions were in fact taken against Syrian opposition groups. I mean, Hezbollah did take out a bunch of ISIS and AQ members, no doubt, but they were pretty indiscriminate in how they went about that. Influential Shia cleric Subi al-Tufaili, a Lebanese senior Shiite cleric and politician who actually helped found Hezbollah in 1982 and was its first secretary general from 1989 until 1991, so, an important figure here, stated that Hezbollah's actions would be remembered as, quote, one of the most shameful periods in Shia history, and that future generations would curse them for their atrocities in Syria. He ridiculed Hezbollah's claims of fighting Islamic State as lies, pointing out that it intervened in Syria far before the emergence of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. He went on to condemn Hezbollah militants for directing most of their attacks against opposition militias that were actually there fighting the Islamic State. Then in cities like Aleppo and Homs, Hezbollah's involvement in the bombardment of civilian areas has been well documented. And a report by Human Rights Watch highlighted that Hezbollah contributed to war crimes there by failing to distinguish between military and civilian targets. Testimonies from defectors and witnesses have indicated that Hezbollah runs its own detention facilities in Syria, where prisoners have reportedly been subjected to torture, including beatings and electric shocks. We have reports from Amnesty International that detail instances of torture by Hezbollah, contributing to a pattern of abuse against civilians and captured opposition fighters. The Syrian American Medical Society has recently reported that medical facilities in areas like Eastern Ghouta and Aleppo were deliberately targeted during military operations that, again, involved Hezbollah. Finally, witnesses have claimed, and it's been documented by the Syrian Network for Human Rights, that Hezbollah fighters have carried out summary executions of captured fighters and civilians accused of supporting operation forces. Now, as of this recording, Hezbollah is appearing more and more on the ropes. They're losing what control they did have in Lebanon. Their fighters are falling by the day. Key leaders that have built up the group for 30-plus years are out of the picture, and Israeli forces are pushing further into the southern portions of the country. I think we should remember at this point that Hezbollah is not the Lebanese government. Still very early in this war, and a lot has yet to be seen, but overall, the destruction of a group like this is a net positive for humanity. Again, Hezbollah is an organization that conducts terrorist attacks, traffics in people and narcotics, and calls for the elimination of an entire group of people. There are a lot of other options, even inside of Lebanon, that don't follow any of those same patterns. So the less power and influence Hezbollah has, it's probably for the better. But that's all I've got for now. Again, don't forget to check out the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. They're linked in the description below, and it's a great way to protect you and your family against predatory data brokers. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.